Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. It is Jeremy Werner and Joey Wagner. We're getting ready to head out to New York City to cover Illinois at Duke. We've covered a lot here on the podcast with Michael Tulip and Derek Piper about basketball, and we'll see how it all goes against one of the top teams in the country. But we're heading out to New York City. Looking forward to that. Get to see the big city a little bit. You excited, Joey?
I am excited. It's you're gonna have a little bit of time to explore, Jeremy, see what's going on out there, get some slices of pizza. Had a good slice in Madison, and it kind of was like a little teaser for New York, a big New York slice, and now let's get the real thing out there.
As a guy who grew up 45 minutes south of Chicago, people will hate me for this, but the New York slice, pretty good. I'm a fan of the New York slice. The deep dish, not as much for me. I love Chicagoland pizza, but I like the thin crust. So New York slice is pretty good, but we got to go somewhere other than Sbarro, all right?
I'm out. Good luck. No, I'm with I'm a big guy. I could probably stand to walk a little bit, and so I do get down on the deep dish pizza. But for the ease of, I'm not a messy person, but for the ease of just a New York slice and not having to worry about everything else, no one cares about that, Jeremy. There's exciting football stuff, and exciting women's basketball stuff to talk about.
Yeah, that's what we want to talk about today. Other than New York Slice is women's basketball. What a resurgence for them after all these injuries. 10 of their last 11 they have won. Huge weekend out in Los Angeles as they play UCLA. We're recording this on Thursday. They play UCLA tonight, and then they play USC, the number 3 and number 4 teams in the country this weekend. So we will dive into that, Joey, because I know you cover this program really, really well, and you know them really, really well. And I think people should be paying attention to them, and I think people are, and I think people are pretty proud of what they're doing. So we will dive into that. But I want to start off the top with some football talk, because we met with Bret Bielema last week, and he had a few announcements, and then Illinois continues with the announcements with some staff changes, and we know April is going to be a huge month for official visits and recruiting, as Illinois currently with the number 6 recruiting class in the country. We'll see how they build on that. But let's start here. It was kind of a worst-kept secret. Clint Sintim out as outside linebackers coach. He goes to Colorado State as the inside linebackers coach. Obviously, that's a step down for Clint Sintim. And Bret Bielema told us the other day, Clint Sintim was moved to the defensive line room in the middle of the season. He did not tell us that during the year, but Trent Harris and Alex Panos have kind of taken over the outside linebackers room. And Trent Harris is promoted to outside linebackers coach, and Alex Panos will be the co-outside linebackers coach. So, Joey, what did you make of this move?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we saw the writing on the wall. You watch coaches on the recruiting trail, and it's everybody. Clint Sintim's not there. Even back in Orlando, we didn't say this because it feels really irresponsible to take 15 minutes of kind of the early parts of a practice walkthrough and try to deduct too much from that. But I remember looking at you, and we're like, something looks off. Just in terms of activity. I'm not trying to say Clint Sintim didn't do anything in Orlando, but it's one of those, you see how coaches run their position groups, and it's like, this is different. But again, it's you post that in Orlando, or you write that, and it's all of a sudden you're being really irresponsible with your reporting. But there were signs that we thought something's different here, and more you heard how much they like Trent Harris, and I think that really is a pretty big driving factor in a lot of this. Obviously, Bret Bielema said they moved Clint Sintim to the, help with Terrence Jamison after the second open week. And again, that's pretty telling for kind of how this thing went down in Champaign. But Trent Harris is a guy Bret Bielema likes a lot. He had told us in the press conference that he'd kind of been courting him for a little bit, and more football playing opportunities kind of persisted and pausing that. And they get Trent Harris here, and he made a really big impact, Jeremy, in the first year he was on campus. And obviously a good promotion for him. Alex Panos has been around for a little bit here. He's not a new face in Champaign, but it's a younger group. And it's guys who we know Trent Harris has been on the recruiting trail. And you in your story with Kingston Shaw, he was a guy who was brought up. So, yeah, it seems like something Bret Bielema kind of got to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here. And I know the first year of Aaron Henry wasn't, all roses and sunshine, but it's like that's the guy that Bret Bielema identified. First year of Aaron Henry as a defensive coordinator, obviously as a DB coach, he was excellent, and then last season he was much better as a coordinator. So Bielema's kind of got an eye for this.
Yeah, I get the thought is, well, what went wrong with Clint Sintim?
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think Bret Bielema would air all that out, but he clearly, I think one of this is he's really high on Trent Harris, right?
Yeah,
This guy, as you said, he'd been courting to try and coach with him because he coached him both with the Patriots and the New York Giants, and was really, it sounds like, Joey, one of the driving forces of the Giants bringing Trent Harris into their outside linebackers room, which Bret Bielema coached. So obviously very impressed with him there. It's clear Bret has a good eye for this with his former players, Aaron Henry, Terrence Jamison. We can go on and on about the guys who have played for him and coached, including two guys who just got NFL jobs, and Kevin Richardson and Grant Morgan. So he clearly likes those guys that have played for him. And obviously they know what Bret Bielema wants out of coaching. And he said that Manny Diaz, who coached Trent Harris while at the U, he said he was the guy he used in his film to explain how to be a technician at the outside linebacker room. So clearly there's a player who, got a lot out of his talent and did that through, perfecting his craft. And Bret said it kind of reminded of him, and Aaron Henry and Terrence Jamison kind of reminded him of him. So he's rolling with it. And while there's some risk there, the one thing I like really about this, Joey, other than that, is there is some continuity here, right? This is a position group that has had no continuity since Kevin Kane left, because you have Charlie Bowen here, and Charlie Bowen's a really good coach. I thought he was going to be a really good recruiter, but he goes back to the NFL. Then you bring in Clint Sintim and you're replacing him. I'm like, man, Gabe Backus is going to have 4 coaches in 4 years here. Alec Bryant, 4 coaches in 4 years here. But you had a guy in Trent Harris and Alex Panos who have been here. Terrence Jamison obviously can oversee part of this because those groups work together so much. So at least there is a little bit of continuity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a big part because before Charlie Bowen, it was Kevin Kane who went and took the defensive coordinator job at Purdue, has now found his way to Minnesota after the change at Purdue. So I did think just having a familiar voice in there was important, because that's a lot of it's a lot of turnover. And as you mentioned, I think Terrence Jamison has some sort of voice, but when you're talking individual drills, when you're talking position meetings, like you would like a little bit of continuity there, Jeremy. So we'll see. You're right. It's not without risk, and we'll see how all of that plays out. But I do think it's telling when you look at the recruiting trail that Trent Harris was the guy who made some of these connections with, especially the class of 2026 in particular.
Well, and in 2026, it was another telling sign for us that Clint Sintim was on his way out when Jacob Alexander is talking about Terrence Jamison, right? And when Kingston Shaw is talking about Terrence Jamison, kind of leading the trail here. So the presence of him, I think, is huge, just because, he's such a good coach. He is such a good coach, and now he's getting a lot of good talent to go along with that. So to have him, like, those rooms do work together, just like the corners and safeties and nickels all work together. So I really, really like that. I do want to mention this. Now, I've asked for clarification, but there's really not a need for it. We have 10 assistant coaches, right? And those coaches used to be all able to be the ones that were on the recruiting trail. That's not the case anymore. So I am not clear that Trent Harris is the 10th assistant, though Illinois named him outside linebackers coach, because it really doesn't matter anymore. I still think like Art Sikowski could be the 10th highest paid staffer, like, that coaches people. Potentially. We'll see what happens with that. I'm just speculating here, but it doesn't matter anymore, because Art Sikowski, whether he's the 10th assistant or the 13th guy, can go on the trail recruiting. He can coach on the field. So now you basically have unlimited guys who can go out on the trail and recruit, because Dre Brown is out on the recruiting trail. Pat Embleton, the general manager, can be out on the recruiting trail. You can just have 10 at a time, but then you also have 20 guys who can do on-field coaching. So the distinction really doesn't matter. It's something we have to get used to, but we'll see how much these guys are paid. And I think that's basically what these 10 assistant spots are for, is how much salary do we allocate to all of these guys.
Yeah, hopefully this is the first step in kind of reframing our mind. Even though it's been like this isn't a new thing with the 10 assistants and what you've seen now is like assistant linebackers coach, assistant DB coach, whatever the case may be. But you're right. It's really a money thing. And frankly, beyond, and in terms of practicality, right, there's still got to be a voice leading the room.
Yes.
That still matters.
And that will be Trent Harris. That was made clear to me. Trent Harris is leading the outside linebackers room, and Alex Panos is his assistant outside linebackers coach there.
But to your point, I mean, it used to be if you weren't one of the 10 assistants, you can't really say a peep during practice. You can't go on the road. You've just got to kind of watch all of this from afar, and that's what's changed. And obviously there's financial implications, right? If you're the voice in the room, if you're meeting with the media once a week, if you're doing those things, there's financial benefits to that. And that's where the levels are. But in terms of going out on the road or going through practice, that's different. And that's something that we have to collectively get used to, and understanding that, one coach being out doesn't mean you have to bring in another $250,000, $300,000 coach as your quote unquote 10th guy, because as you mentioned, your 14th guy can do that, right? Your 15th, whatever it looks like.
Like
So
Art Sikowski has basically replaced Barry Lunny on the recruiting trail for like 90% of it, right? Like Barry still goes out, especially with the main targets, the quarterback targets, all that. But Art's the guy that's grinding, because Barry really doesn't need to do that at this point of his career. He's the offensive coordinator. He's the schemer. Yes, he comes in and really helps in recruiting, but that's a guy preparing for a head coaching role at some point. So you want him being more on campus, doing a lot of the teaching, doing a lot of the scheming.
That's right. And with some of these other positions, now you look at Trent Harris. I don't know. We'll see what this contract looks like when it's done. Is he going to make what Clint did? I don't know. Maybe that money is Trent gets a lot of it. Art gets a pay bump. Alex Panos gets a pay bump. However that works. I mean, we're kind of in the weeds on that a little bit. But for all intents and purposes, when you're following a program, that's really the big thing that kind of differentiates some of these positions. It's a good opportunity to circle it back, Jeremy. A good opportunity for Trent Harris, and a guy that was on our radar when we started kind of putting out some feelers of, hey, what's up here? Why is Clint not on the road? Why some of this stuff that we're observing being the case? And you kind of heard a little bit like, hey, we'll see what happens. I know they like Trent Harris, and that was a name that had come up time and time again. So it's not really a surprise that this was a route that Bret Bielema took.
Yeah, when we kind of started thinking this was a possibility of Sintim leaving, and Sintim made $425,000 this past year, by the way, so significant salary. There are two names. It was like, would Kevin Kane come back? Would Illinois want him back? Would Kevin Kane want to come back? Or is it Trent Harris just getting promoted? And you and I both thought Trent Harris was the likely one, just because we know how Bielema feels about him, and that ended up being the case. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating well easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you. Factor arrives fresh and fully prepared, perfect for any active and busy lifestyle. And with over 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. So you can choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. And Factor can help you feel your best all day long with wholesome smoothies, breakfast, grab-and-go snacks, and more add-ons. So reach your goals this new year with ingredients you can trust and convenience that can't be beat. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Illini50off and use code Illini50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code Illini50off at factormeals.com/Illini50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Let's talk about the other staff hire. A big one. Nate McNeal coming back. Can't get enough of champagne. Third time Nate McNeal has come back to Illinois in the recruiting department. He's been with Pat Embleton for 6 years, 3 under Lovie Smith, as he was the director of high school relations, basically the in-state guy here. And then he was the director of player personnel, left to become Syracuse's GM. That opens the role for Dre Brown. Dre Brown leaves after just a year, not even a year, to go to USC. And now Nate McNeal comes back as the director of, I got to find the title, but it's a bigger title. I'm sure it's a bigger salary. But Nate McNeal back is the number 2 to Pat Embleton here. That's a big time power move, Joey, to go get a sitting Power 5 general manager, right? After you lose a guy like Dre Brown, who obviously made a big impact. McNeal is the executive director of player evaluation and acquisition.
It's a nice way to say, maybe you don't have the GM title, but we're gonna financially take care of you, and you're gonna have a lot of responsibility on campus.
Not only a director, but an executive director.
Executive director. It makes sense, right? I think what we've seen with Pat Embleton in this GM role, and it's clear that he's got a very, very heavy voice in building his own department. I don't think this is Bret Bielema kind of leading the charge. And he obviously signs off on this stuff. You've got to have a relationship. I think he trusts Pat to build this department and to build it effectively.
Notably, Pat Embleton, the first quote in the statement, right? In the press release.
Right.
He had the first quote, I believe.
That's right. So it's clear that he spearheaded this. And he goes with, so far, what we've seen, and the doors have been open, Pat likes to work with people that he works with because he trusts them, and he brings back Dre Brown. And that was a very big move to get Dre Brown from Notre Dame, and someone that we know that Pat worked hard to get to come back to Illinois. So when Dre left, it's like, okay, you have to take in a few things into consideration. Clearly, I think this is someone that you want maybe a little bit younger in that space. Typically, they'd had ties to the state of Illinois. Nate McNeal checks that box, checks the state of Illinois box. Remember, he was big on the Malik Elzy recruitment when you look back at that moment in time and that recruitment, Jeremy. And it's someone that Pat trusts. Like those three boxes, it's kind of like all arrows were pointing to Nate. The question that you and I had, and we had talked about this off pod, was, wait a minute, he's a GM at Syracuse. He's a GM in a Power 5 program. So how do you make this work?
In a program that just went 10-3 in Fran Brown's first year, right?
That's right.
Signed a pretty good recruiting class for Syracuse, number 41 in the country. That's really good for an ACC program. That's not Miami, right?
That's right. So when we were talking about this, is like, if he's a possibility, and I think he as we mentioned, he checked the box. It's like, what do you got to do to make this make sense for Nate McNeal, who's in a really good spot? And I think you see with the title that matters. And coming back to Illinois, he clearly has a lot of ties in the state. He knows how. This is his third time coming to Champaign, second time with Bret Bielema. So he knows how a Bret Bielema program runs. This isn't, Pat Embleton, someone he had worked with in the past who had never met Bret. There's a relationship there. There's a connection. The expectations in the building. How they go about it in this department, which I think is a really big deal. Then it's a power move. As you said, this is hey, we are going to operate like a 10-win program, like a program on the rise in one of the Power 2 conferences, and we're going to make things work to get the right guys in here, and we're going to find out a way to do that. And it's a credit to Josh Whitman as well for making sure the program has the resources, and a credit to Bret Bielema and Pat Embleton for having a building that people want to come back to.
Yeah,
I think that matters.
And the other thing about this, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. But you can hit the ground running with Nate, right? Like he's got familiarity with the state. He's got familiarity with the program. This isn't a guy that's got to learn his way around the building, learn how, as you said, Bret Bielema operates, how Pat Embleton operates, what his role is going to be. It's hit the ground running, and there's no better time to do that than when Illinois has the number 6 recruiting class in the country and is about to have official visits. Like Nate knows this university. He knows this building. He knows the coaches, right? So like, he doesn't need to get up to speed with their personalities and how to sell this program. He's done it over and over again, whether it was with 2016-18 Lovey, knowing how far the program has come since then and knowing how far Bielema has helped them in state, or being here as this program was on the rise. And now he gets to say, hey, I came back here because I think this place is special. That's why you should be a part of this too. A Chicago guy, Northern Illinois graduate, and just has so much experience in here. It's home run hire, for my opinion. After you lose Dre Brown, who was an important part of this program's recruiting the last year, I don't think you're losing much with Nate. Dre's a different personality than Nate, right? But they both have a lot that they can add to this program. So I just think it's a great response to that.
Yeah, and people would say, okay, well, he was a GM at Syracuse. Why'd he come back? And obviously, there's a belief in Bielema and Pat Embleton. What it appeared to me, and Jeremy, you would probably should turn this over to you in terms of day-to-day duties and what we think, without talking to Nate McNeal to this point, without talking to Bret Bielema, Pat Embleton about this particular job to this point. It's pretty clear Pat Embleton has a 10,000-foot view of this, right? And everything
His job has changed a lot, right? Like a general manager is so important. It's why that job, I mean, if you're in this industry, that is a rising industry. You want to be on this thing, because all of a sudden a recruiting coordinator back in the day made maybe $60,000 to $100,000. Now this person is so valuable. It's becoming more and more like a general manager in football, where it's a head coach making the decisions more than the general manager is in NFL. But the general manager is is one of the most important people in that building because they are basically running a personnel department now. Like this is a huge free agency with the transfer portal, prep recruiting. And then, Joey, we're getting into contracts. We are going to get into these revenue sharing contracts. Eventually, are we going to get into employment contracts? So while Pat is a big part of like recruiting and pitching and all these things, there's so much more to the job than that nowadays. So yeah, Pat's got to worry about everything. And then he's got to have leaders within that department that handle the creative side, like Patrick Pearson, that handle the transfer evaluations, that handle the prep evaluations, that handle high school coaches like Pat Ryan does. That's why you see these departments expanding and you're seeing different verticals within these. And it seems like McNeal's player personnel, right? Like this is going to be mostly prep, in-state recruiting, stuff like that. But the acquisitions part is really interesting as well. So we'll dive into them about what this actually is. Bret Bielema suggested they're changing, the structure of their recruiting department. So we'll find out all these things. But to your point, Pat's at the head of it, but then he's got a bunch of verticals underneath him.
Yeah, and the acquisition part of it is what jumped out to me, because if I'm sure I'm remembering this correctly, Dre Brown had the high school term in his
director of player personnel was his title.
Yeah, okay. I wonder, with losing Jay Kaiser to the NFL, to Jacksonville, if Nate will also have a heavy hand in the transfer portal. Like Dre was very high school driven. Obviously, he was involved in the portal, and because that's how you have to be all hands on deck in the transfer portal era. But I wonder if that's maybe an increased role for Nate McNeal. We're just speculating. We're going to talk to, I would assume, Nate McNeal at some point, to Pat Embleton at some point, to Bret Bielema at some point. But
I mean, you could think of a structure where it's like Pat is the GM, and then he's got like the director of college personnel, right? Just like an NFL team, and the director of high school personnel. And does Nate oversee both of those? And then Pat also oversees the creative department, and Pat Ryan and the high school relation. It's really interesting. It's just it's a changing time in football recruiting, that is for sure.
Yeah, and listen, listeners might be lost in this, right? Because there's so much, like, if you're just listening and you don't see Jeremy making his little tree here with his hands to explain all of this, it is like it can be confusing, but the name of the game is acquisition. It's talent acquisition. That's what it comes down to, and it's managing talent acquisition, as you mentioned, with contracts, with positional needs, with skill set needs within a position. Like all of that goes into it. So you need a lot of people running this. And if you want to operate like a big time program, a 10-win program, a program that's in a Power 2 conference, you need these branches off of these trees, right? That's just what it takes.
Just something, this is a good way of looking at it before we get into the women's basketball stuff, is 10 years ago, Alex Golesh was basically the recruiting coordinator, right? And you had Pat Embleton and somebody else. There were two guys is the recruiting department basically along with them. And then they had people who helped recruit on campus and all that stuff. But that was an assistant coach that had that title. Now, this is way more like an NFL thing in that you have the head of the department and then all these other people underneath them. But in my discussion on this podcast in December at signing day, Pat Embleton I asked him, like, do you need a capologist? He said, we are looking for someone like that in our department. How we spend money, how we allocate our resources financially to acquire players. That's all not part of it. So just thinking about how far that's come in the last 10 years of me covering it for this site, Joe, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And again, for the listener, probably 85% of that is not anything you'll notice day to day, right? It's all behind the scenes. What you notice is the talent coming into campus, the talent visiting campus, the talent committing to campus, the talent not committing to campus, whatever it is, like that's what you notice. All of this stuff, we just got in the weeds for 6 minutes that most people aren't going to notice, but there is a behind the scenes look at this. And it's just really the best way to talk about it, as you mentioned, is how much this has grown and changed and evolved over the course of 10 years.
And that Illinois seems like they're in the forefront of it, right? Like they're at least not behind, right? Like they're understanding that. And I think Bret Bielema's time in the NFL certainly helps. I would even say Lovie Smith, like hiring James Kirkland back in the day. Like that was an NFL scout that was scouting transfers, scouting, the way he did, finding guys like Devin Witherspoon and all that. Like I thought Lovie's NFL experience paid off a little bit there. Just didn't have the transfer portal, didn't have NIL at that time. So you wonder if that could help them a little bit more But I think Bielema's time in the NFL and just Bielema being as organized as he is, I think really pays off here. Any final thoughts on football, Joey? Obviously, a lot of official visits coming up in April. I think it's very notable that Illinois is in the top 5 or 6 or 7, whatever Trey put out a second time. Trey Taylor, 2027 quarterback, and announced in June. I think Illinois is right in the mix there. I think Michigan could be tough to beat, but you recruit that guy into the end. He's a 2027 kid, so there's another year and a half before he signs a letter of intent. But to be in that mix, to be in the top 4 for JC Anderson, basically of his official visits, top 5 for Max Suter, and then they'll have a bunch of their top targets here in a big April, which the calendar continues to get moved up. So any thoughts on that, Jay?
No, I actually wanted to ask you about how that's changed, because official visits, the timing of these continues to evolve, Jeremy, and I'm wondering if that's ultimately going to end up in a summer signing window. Maybe not this class. It feels far too early to make it a 2026 thing. But moving forward, does that give kids an opportunity to sign in maybe July or August or whatever? Because you're seeing these all kind of go up a little further. Maybe that's transfer portal driven and getting your spot and going down that road with that. But it COVID changed it, right? COVID, when the doors opened and everything was like, you can go back on campus, June became the month. Like, that was first weekend of June. We covered it, right? We talked to Pat Embleton on this podcast about it, about how you got to structure that, whether you have an in-state weekend, a Florida weekend, you're bringing commits on. June was it. And you built so much of your class in that month, but you're seeing that start to change. We know Carson Boyd was, he visited before the summer, the 2025 quarterback who committed to Illinois. You've seen Illinois now build a lot of its, or a good amount of its recruiting class before you even get to March, right? Now you've seen April official visits. So I'm curious your input on how and why and what that means that it's changing and this calendar gets pushed forward.
I think it's leverage. I think the transfer portal has changed a lot of that. If you want your roster spot, if you want your revenue sharing deal moving forward, I think you better get on early, because the transfer portal, the transfers, all of that stuff, like that has taken a lot of the precedence because of what they can bring. But, a guy like Jack Paris was able to hang around and find a spot at the end. But if you hang around to the fall, man, they're going to find somebody else, whether that's a transfer or another prep prospect. So that's really expedited that process. And I'll tell you, like, if you're not a top 100 prospect, like if you're not a 4-star prospect, I think you want to lock up your spot. And it's expedited the process a little bit for these high school kids. Maybe it hurts for the kids. Maybe it hurts for a lot of high school kids who are late developers. That's the other side of this, but there'll still be some roster spots at the end for some people. But I think it's just a little bit of leverage of these coaches can now say, hey, you better hop on now, because we're going to go get somebody in the fall, and it's probably going to be another college player, because there's not much time to recruit in the fall. You're more looking at your own roster, and you're looking at the transfer portal in December. So I'm wondering if the signing period gets moved up at some point, just because if all these kids are committing in April and June and before that, why not let them lock up a spot? And then, they're locked up with you as well, especially when we got these revenue sharing deals.
Yeah, it also brings me to wonder, what do game day visits look like? Maybe not in 2026, but we saw with Illinois a lot, because their class was built largely in June. Game day visits became, hey, commits, come hot, smile, whatever, see everything. But now you're getting ahead in 26. You're getting ahead in 27. We saw a lot of 26 kids on campus. So does the fall become kind of your new game day for the next class, right? And maybe you sneak a Gabe Akis. Remember when he visited game day, or you sneak some of those later guys.
Yeah.
Grant Smith, maybe that happens, but I'm curious if that's okay, you're committed, come through, hang out, we'll do the whole thing, but let's get some 26s or next year be 27s, 28s, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. It's just the whole process has moved up. Like the February signing day is dead, right? Like it's absolutely dead.
It's just for Bielema to flex we've kept this quiet here.
Yeah, but like even nationally, like this used to be the day that everyone was putting hats on. It was a big day for college football. It's not the case anymore. So like for me, I sit there and think, I don't know, the week before or after all these media days, like August 1st, right before training camp starts. Like, make that the recruiting day. It's the unofficial kickoff of training camp for all these places. And then you can really focus on the actual football. Maybe that's what they should do, is have that. And then the February signing day, where kids who want to go through the fall, want to go through all the coaching changes, they can sign then. That makes more sense. It's more similar to basketball. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that.
Yeah, I mean, having a signing period in December and then again in February, I mean, almost nothing changed. Like, coaches want their kids signed, right? They want their kids signed as early as possible, because you don't have to, for the most part, worry about the next coach coming in and trying to bother them and flip them and do that. And the kids get their spot. Like, it makes sense to push that up. Having one 8 weeks apart,
Yeah, I guess it's 8 weeks now because they moved it up to early December to fit the transfer portal. But I would just do kind of what the basketball and every other sport does: the early signing period, then the late signing period, like 5 months apart. That makes a lot more sense to me.